let's get started. So when we talk about the origins of art in early human societies, it's tempting to imagine some lone genius painting on a cave wall, but really, that's not how it began at all. In those early hunter-gatherer groups, art was a collective thing. Everyone got involved, from the elders to the kids. It wasn't just about making something pretty to hang on the wall either. The arts, singing, dancing, storytelling, and yes, those first visual marks, were woven into the fabric of daily life. They were about expressing the social world, not just individual creativity. Now, if we look at the archaeological record, there are these fascinating objects like the Makapansgat pebble and the Barakat ram figurine. These are natural stones that, by pure chance, look a bit like faces or figures. The Makapansgat pebble, for example, is over 3 million years old and has this uncanny resemblance to a human face. But here's the thing, these weren't carved or shaped by humans, at least not in any obvious way. They were probably picked up and treasured because they looked familiar, like us. It's a bit like seeing faces in clouds, right? That tendency, which we now call pareidolia, is something we've talked about in earlier episodes, but these objects hint at a very early sensitivity to pattern and form, and maybe even a sense of shared meaning. I remember my first visit to a cave site. I was just completely captivated by the idea that people, tens of thousands of years ago, would gather together in these dark, echoing spaces to make art. It wasn't just about the images on the walls. It was the sense of community, of people coming together to create something that belonged to everyone. That communal aspect, I think, is so easy to overlook when we're staring at a photo in a textbook. But in those moments, art was a way of binding the group, of making sense of the world together. And, as we discussed in previous episodes, this collective experience of art, seeing, making, and even touching, was emotionally powerful. It wasn't about aesthetics in the modern sense. The meaning was often opaque, maybe even mysterious, but it was always social. That's really the foundation for everything that comes later. So why did the arts become so central to group cohesion and trust? Well, it turns out that making and participating in the arts is actually quite costly. I mean, think about it. Time, effort, resources, all spent on something that doesn't directly help you find food or build shelter. But that's exactly the point. Because it's costly, it becomes a kind of honest signal. If you're willing to invest in these communal activities, you're showing everyone else that you're committed to the group, that you're trustworthy. It's a way of filtering out the free riders, the people who might want to take advantage without giving back. There's a brilliant case study in this, actually, Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey. This site, 11,500 years old, is just extraordinary. It's a massive complex of stone pillars, some weighing many tons, all carved and arranged by people who were still essentially hunter-gatherers. The amount of work that went into building and decorating this place is staggering. And what's really interesting is that it seems to have been a gathering place for ritual and ceremony, a kind of social glue that brought together groups who might not otherwise have trusted each other. The same goes for Çatalhöyük, a Neolithic town where art and ritual objects were built into the very walls of people's homes. Sometimes these objects were even deliberately destroyed and incorporated into the architecture, which suggests a cycle of renewal and remembrance. These kinds of collective rituals and performances, whether it's dancing, singing, or making art, helped foster trust and cooperation. They allowed groups to grow beyond what's called Dunbar's number, that sort of cognitive limit of about 150 people that we can keep track of in terms of relationships. When you get bigger than that, it's hard to know who to trust. But if you've all participated in the same costly, emotionally charged rituals, it creates a sense of belonging and shared identity. It's a bit like, well, I suppose going to a music festival or a big sporting event today. There's this feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. And, as the research shows, these rituals weren't just for show. They were a way of managing social stress, of helping people cooperate in larger, more anonymous groups. The arts became a kind of social technology, if you like, for building and maintaining trust networks that could stretch far beyond the immediate family or clan. Now let's talk about how the arts evolved into something even more powerful, a kind of external memory, or what some researchers call exograms. Before about 40,000 years ago, most art was pretty simple. Geometric marks, beads, maybe some ochre for body decoration. But after that, we see this explosion of figurative cave art, sculptures, musical instruments, and more. And this shift seems to coincide with rising population levels and more stable, interconnected communities. The idea here is that as groups got bigger, it became harder to keep all the important information, stories, rituals, social rules, just in people's heads. So the arts became a way to store and transmit knowledge outside the brain, in a form that could be shared across generations. It's a bit like, well, the first communal hard drive, if you want a modern analogy. These external memory systems allowed culture to accumulate, to become more complex and resilient, even as individual members came and went. I have to say, this is where visual neuroscience really helped me understand what was going on. Derek Hodgson's research, which we've touched on before, showed how the brain responds to these ancient images, not just as pictures, but as emotionally charged, socially meaningful signals. The act of making and experiencing art activated all these neural networks for empathy, memory, and social connection. It's not just about what's on the wall. It's about what happens in the minds of the people who see it, and how that shapes the group as a whole. So, as we look at the rise of complex societies from the caves of Upper Paleolithic Europe to the monumental sites of the Neolithic, the arts are right there at the heart of it all. They're not just decoration, they're the scaffolding for social memory, innovation, and identity. And honestly, I think that's what makes studying this period so endlessly fascinating. There's still so much to uncover, and I can't wait to dig deeper in future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.